Today we are discussing The Chosen, Season 1, Episode 3, directed by Dallas Jenkins. This is Nathan.
This is Jason.
John.
It's Nick.
All right, we are a group of guys from mixed beliefs and backgrounds, so we thought it'd be fun to talk about this show together. We're going through each episode. So you can expect a mix of religious and non-religious perspectives. I think that makes it fun. And we'll have a good time. We'll have some beer together. So speaking of beer, what are you guys drinking tonight?
Buffalo Sweat. Well, let me get the liver out there.
That's good
Buffalo
stuff.
Sweat with tall grass, but it's actually made by Wichita Brewing, which is a essential Wichita brewery.
Okay. I've actually been to the Tallgrass Brewery. Did they sell that to Wichita Brewing Company?
They actually went out of business. They got too big too fast. It's when the craft beer world was one of those things. And that recipes, I think, actually go to Wichita Brewing. So they're doing that. So it's an oatmeal stout with vanilla bean. It's amazing.
Oh, you got the vanilla version. Because there's a regular one too.
Yeah, they just got the regular oatmeal, and then they also got the vanilla bean one. This was the vanilla bean.
Taste.
You like vanilla?
What about you, Nick?
So I'm sporting water again, but it's because I've got a beer that's fermenting, and so our next podcast here, I'll have it ready. It's an export beer, also known as a Dortmunder, because it's from Dortmund, Germany. So it's a German lager mixed with an IPA, kind of. It's fantastic. So it's a little more hoppy than a regular light lager, but it's not as hoppy or alcoholic as an American IPA. So it's like 4.5%, 5%. So yeah, I will have that next time.
Ooh, what are you gonna name it? Like the St. Nicholas and St. Nick brew?
Actually, the Doppelbock I drank a couple weeks back, that actually won me a competition. So.
Ooh, well, what do you name it?
So for my German brews, I'm really just rolling with the same name, Bowling Brow. It's
awesome. Play on your last name.
Well, it pays homage to, if you guys watch Breaking Bad, Schrader Brow. Yeah. You know.
What about you, John?
So I'm the odd man out again this week, and I promise next episode I'll have a beer, but I'm with Basil Hayden tonight. So yeah, I like my bourbons and scotches. But I promise I will have a beer for the next episode.
That's all right, man. No problem.
I almost got a scotch there just because you keep drinking scotch. Yeah, a bottle of Bovini 25 pack. I was gonna get a little bit of it.
Ooh, very nice.
So this is what I have. My girlfriend gave me a 6-pack of Guinness Extra Stout last night that she has had for over a year. And so I'm kind of concerned. I mean, I have my choice between a beer that's not expired and an expired beer. So I thought, oh man, I'm poor. I can't let a good beer go to waste. So that's what I have in this glass. Slightly concerned about what might happen afterwards, but we'll see. Like, it won't make you
you'll be fine.
Will it? If beer goes bad, no?
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. If she's like giving you like a real good old beer, she's trying to get rid of her crap. I think it's kind of like
yeah, here's my leftovers.
Here's my 2-year aged Budweiser.
Let me get you the special present that I don't want. No, I'm kidding. I'm very
Milwaukee's best.
3-year-old Limerita.
Yeah. Okay, so we had a contest last episode. Whoever shared the post for our second episode would get entered into a drawing for a $25 Visa gift card. So I have in this cup some names of people who shared the post. I'm going to shake it up. I'm going to draw a name.
People actually shared it.
And the winner, Meow Kitty Purr. This is an Instagram profile, obviously. I don't know who it is, but Meow Kitty Purr, you are the winner. So I will contact you and we'll arrange how to get you your gift card. Don't spend it all in one place. Yeah.
All I gotta say is that awesome. that better be a female. Is all I gotta say.
It is. It is. So, did you guys have any unresolved questions from the last episode that you went and did research on, or any thoughts after our episode 2 discussion before we dive into episode 3?
Not really. I have seen. I've watched the director Dallas Jenkins talk about this series a little bit, and it seems like we're coming up on maybe like an inflection point. So either like things are really about to start picking up, or just what he mentioned episode 4 is one of his favorite. So I'm, not to downplay what we've seen or discussed so far or today's episode, but I'm excited to find out what that is. And if it lets me down, I'm not going to be happy.
I heard about what happens in season 2, episode 1, and I'm really interested in that. So I think there's a lot to look forward here. So we didn't have any burning questions like the Mary Magdalene controversy this time. Easy. Okay.
I don't know if you guys noticed the last time I looked on YouTube, there was a couple other discussions about this series as well. One of them, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, was they were talking about the role of women. Does this series actually elevate women more than what they should be, or and so it was kind of, I didn't look at it, but I was going to watch it. I was like, that was kind of interesting, and it looked like it had a priest and somebody there sitting at a table, and I was like, that's kind of interesting that they're kind of picking up on some of the themes that we're picking up on as well. So,
yeah, I've been keeping an eye on that too. I think that's interesting. That might come back a little bit in this episode. Do you guys want to dive into the plot summary for episode 3?
Sure. Sounds good.
All right. So once again, I took this from pathos.com. It seems to be working for us, so might as well keep rolling with it. Episode 3, Jesus loves the little children. Synopsis. Jesus is living in a tent on the outskirts of Capernaum. He cooks his own food. He bandages his arm. He plies his trade as a craftsman. He says his prayers. A young girl named Abigail discovers his tent and plays with some of the objects she finds. But she runs away when he returns. The next day, she comes back with a boy, and they introduce themselves to Jesus. The 2 children return the next day with the other children, and as time goes by, Jesus tells them stories and teaches them how to pray. Eventually, Jesus packs up and goes, but not before leaving some toys and a note behind just for Abigail. All right. So I picked up on some themes that I think would be interesting to talk about from this episode. There's a lot of interesting wisdom that I think Jesus shares with the kids. And what's most interesting about it to me was a lot of the stuff that he talks about with them is actually stuff that like adults are struggling with or wrestling with. Even in normal life, with religion, things like that. So it's interesting. The things he talks about with them are not really aimed at kids or aimed at anybody. So that's what I thought was most interesting about this episode. So when it first starts, like, I don't have kids. I don't know what to do with kids below middle school. So it took me like 10 minutes to get into this. But once he starts like talking about philosophy and scripture and stuff, like then it got really engaging for me. So
this was actually for me. This was actually my favorite. This was my favorite one so far for me.
Oh, that's
really liked it. Just a lot of the fact that they did use the kids. I think is what's interesting. Is kids by nature real inquisitive. They ask a lot of questions, and I think they're actually using that kid's nature to get the message out. And to get the question. I really like that. And if you notice, as you mentioned, he never tells them his name is Jesus the whole time.
Ah, I didn't catch that. I wonder if they ever figured it out. I don't know.
Why would they figure it out?
Yeah,
this guy is,
he's nobody yet. Yeah,
a couple years up the road, but I mean,
yeah, once he gets famous, I guess.
Yeah, the whole resurrection post-cross thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's some themes I pulled out, and then I'll kind of turn it over to you guys, and we can walk through it. One of them is money. There's kind of a theme about wealth versus poverty, especially involving the toys and their discussion about them. Um, there's justice. There's um, the Messiah, like an expectation of a Messiah coming and what he's going to be like. And wisdom. I think that's it. I just dropped my sheet. So, what do you guys think?
I think there's also a role of women as well. If you notice, Abigail's clearly the leader and smartest one of the bunch.
Oh yeah, and she can read, which I thought was
significant.
significant.
Was it Jesus at one point makes a statement? He said, "We should let some of these kids that are actually in school answer the questions," or something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that goes along the theme of something I kind of wanted to talk about, and it was something I meant to look up, and I just didn't have time prior to this call to dive into. But he makes the comment of she doesn't even go to Torah class. And that was something I found kind of interesting. And I didn't know if any of you kind of had some background on that in terms of, was that strictly a male course that was being taught? Again, I'm not overly familiar with that side of things.
I think
I understand that just based on modern day Judaism, women do not go to that school. They don't go to that. That's males only. So when it comes to religion or any of that type of stuff, it's really heavily dominated by the males. And so, like you said, women, she reads, but she learned how to read. Obviously, somebody taught her how to read. So that's just kind of odd. And so, yeah, is kind of, I think in a way I think Jesus is actually kind of in a way kind of insulting the other kids because she's actually her intellect is just so superior and she's just a dumb girl, I guess, if you look at that time frame, but she's not. She's well above the other ones.
I wonder if they're like trying to say something philosophically there, like I don't know, a lot of people assume poor people are dumb or something. So were they trying to break a stereotype or something like that?
Did you guys catch the name Abigail? If you look at Abigail, is actually, which is before this time, that's the second wife of King David. And if you look at the scripture, it actually talks about her being over intelligent, actually, and she actually convinces David to be more, not as heavy handed. And so when you look at this girl here, I'm thinking, because we talked about that before, how sometimes they take other characters and through the Bible and turn them into these, they more or less just took the character of Abigail, David's second wife, and turned it into this little girl.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, because I think they borrowed stuff from Zacchaeus for Matthew. So that would be in keeping with that same kind of approach. I actually mistook that comment about her not going to Torah class. I thought maybe she's not a Jew, but then when I was talking to some people, they said no, like girls didn't go to school back then. So that made sense. What about this money, like wealth versus poverty theme? I looked up just because I knew money was something that Jesus teaches a lot about. And there are 800 mentions about wealth in the Bible. It is the second most mentioned topic. So must be important or something. Man,
well, it's helping the poor.
Oh, yeah.
You look at the Bible, it goes along with that wealth thing, helping the poor, helping the needy, more times in the Bible than any place. If you look at modern day Christianity, it's kind of skimmed right by it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very uncomfortable topic, right? So Jesus made a comment though when he actually said sometimes it's better to be poor. I believe when he was talking to Abigail. So I don't know. What do you guys make of a statement like that?
Because you learn to appreciate what you have a little bit better, or you can learn to appreciate what you have a little bit better. the stereotype of a rich person who gets whatever they want. I break a toy, I'm just gonna buy a new one. Well, if you're poor, you're gonna appreciate it. You're gonna be wanting to help people. You're gonna be willing to interact and be kind with others because you know what it means when someone's kind and helpful to you. So I think that's kind of in my mind what he was kind of saying. Sometimes it's not bad to be poor because you're rich in other ways.
That's good. And along that thought process, I mean, things that you work for, things that you toil at and labor for, typically mean more to you because it's an investment on your part to where it's not something that's given to you. At the same time, poverty's awful. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said about learning to help others through those experiences, what it means to be a servant and a leader in those situations. So yeah, there's value there.
I think the corrupting nature of money, I think what I got referring to that, where they're, sometimes the wealthy are not good people and they love their money more than each other. You're the poor actually, with everything you guys said, but you tend to love your family more. That's the center of your universe. The thing that's most important to you, or sometimes the wealthy thing that's most important to them is your wealth. So it's kind of everything kind of mixed in. All of us hit around the nail on that one, in my opinion.
People fight over wealth a lot. Like if you've ever seen people trying to settle an inheritance, I mean, it can bring out some really nasty stuff between siblings. But just for me, I can think of like, okay, let's say, I've been at a point where I was like fairly broke, and then I got some unexpected money, and I'm thinking, oh, good, man, I'm so much more comfortable now. Now I've got a savings or whatever. Like I should be content, but then I'm automatically thinking about like what I need next. Like I think potentially money can be a bottomless pit. So I can see why it would be a potential stumbling block for people. Not that I don't want money or anything.
Have you heard it was like on Letterman or something, but Eminem made a quote and he was saying something like, money doesn't bring happiness. It brings filthy, stinking happiness. I think there's some expletives he used, but basically he was saying it doesn't just make you happy. It makes you unbelievably happy. And I thought that was funny. But you're right. Money inherently can corrupt. Not necessarily the person, but just who you can be.
I almost feel like I'd be better off living in a small apartment with like two things, like a guitar and like one video game and a book.
Gonna agree to disagree.
Well, I feel torn. Like I have time off. It's like, oh, which of these 50 things do I do? You know what I mean? Like it's put your brain into hyperdrive, and maybe it's
really don't have kids yet.
It's gonna get worse. Is that what you're telling me?
That takes up all your time right there. Kids do.
Yeah. What do I want to do? I have free time. Oh wait, I don't have free time.
18 years, man. You'll have some back.
17 and a half.
When both of my kids grew up and got out of the house, I was like, I have no kids now. What do I do now? Where all this extra free time come from?
Where'd all this money come from?
Yeah. Well, no, they still shake me down quite a bit.
So I do think it's also kind of interesting too, and I'm curious to see if anybody else kind of thought this, but it almost seemed like this was one of the first times that the kids had heard something along these lines in terms of the Messiah is there not only for the wealthy but also the poor. That it was, a slight shift, and I don't know, maybe that was something I just read too much into, or I'm just curious if anybody else kind of saw that.
Yeah, I kind of get that because there's a lot of stigma. I mean, we're all from the middle class. There's a lot of stigma around poor people. And I've seen groups that they look down on them. Well, Jesus doesn't really seem to do that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you look at when it comes to that kind of goes with that theme, that prosperity ministry, I think is what you guys are talking about. Is I think even at that time frame, if you're poor or anything bad happens to you, it's because you fall out of favor with God. Reason for
Right.
that. I think they look down on you not because you're poor, they look down on you because you're poor because you did something that made God mad. That's just the way.
That's kind of what happens in the book of Job. Like one of his friends, or like all of Job's friends try to give him advice for why he's in the situation he is, and most of them give bad advice, like, oh, you did something wrong and God's ticked off or something. It really didn't have anything to do with that. I guess that was a common mindset back in that day, though.
I have issues with that book of Job. To be honest with you, that story I think we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
I think modern day Christianity looks at it, they don't see the message is this guy was real righteous and he stayed with God. I think they pick up the story as, look, this guy was righteous and he got rewarded tenfold. So if you stay with God, you're going to be rich. Wrong message.
So some people use that to reinforce the prosperity gospel position.
You'll be rewarded if you stay.
Okay. So I look at it, yeah, I can see why they think that, but I would look at it more like, just because you're doing what God wants you to do doesn't mean you're not going to go through some terrible tragedy. But yeah, it's interesting to see that, like, those same broken theologies that were existing in that book are still alive today, and some of them come up in this episode. I think that's really interesting. What about the whole justice theme? Like, this one really caught my attention. This conversation that Jesus has with the kid that shoved somebody down at school, this eye for an eye thing. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
His things, was it forgiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's one of the few things from the Old Testament I actually agree with, man. Eye for an eye. There's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to manage my statements here because me and Purdy were talking prior to this about other current topics, but the moral of the story is I feel like there's something to be said about an eye for an eye. It's okay. I don't feel like it's necessarily easy to forgive someone. Someone murders your family or wrongs you or steals from you. Man, it's going to take me a long time to forgive that individual. And then you see people who are able to forgive. It's like, what the hell? I need some of the Kool-Aid you're drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, caveat all of this with I'm the non-religious background, so just for those reminding people. Anyway.
Well, religion aside, I also think there's something to be said about carrying hate in your heart. And granted, there are definitely, I'm feel fairly confident in saying this, but there are things that all of us have that we hold sacred and dear that we would protect above everything else. And, if somebody were to wrong you or take that from you, that would be a difficult decision to make. And I think what Jesus was trying to convey there, and he said, vengeance is God's. And it's not that you don't live with that or you don't. It's not that forgiveness factor. I think is something that we all. I know I grapple with in a lot of ways, but the alternative is so corruptive and corrosive to where a person can go as far as being consumed by it. And I kind of felt like that would have been part of that message there, that vengeance is God's. It's better to let that go, let the hate go. And again, that's easier said than done in a lot of ways.
I always think of, when I hear that word eye for an eye, I always think of, he's not Christian, Dalai Lama, his quote is, "An eye for an eye would leave the whole world blind." So I think he more or less kind of has exact truth. I think in here, I kind of agree with John. I mean, here in this series, Jesus is talking about vengeance is not for you. I mean, he kind of refers to as the court's decision or it's God's decision. You gotta do that, kind of let that go. And so I don't think the kids are being taught that. I think this whole series, he's kind of like he's re-educating them. I think when you look at Pharisees, is teaching them, no, vengeance is yours. Do what you need to do. And so the kids kind of will say things like, an eye for an eye, or we have the right to defend ourselves, things like that. He's like John said, you don't need to have that, be carrying around that much hate. That's not beneficial for you. Let God deal with it.
Mm-hmm. So that's what's profound to me about some of the stuff that the series is doing, and in this episode, the way they approach that topic, because I saw the Old Testament and New Testament as like separate, almost conflicting things for a long time, and the way that Jesus addresses that here helps me see a link better, because in the Old Testament, when they give that eye for an eye law, like I never saw that before as contextually something for a court of law. Like I saw that as like you're out in the field and somebody, you know, hurts you, you can hurt them back equivalently or something like that. I never saw that as something for the courts. So for him to bring that up to the kids, that's for a court of law. Now I kind of see the context a little better. I mean, I'd kind of gotten there, but I still struggle to see how the Old Testament and the New Testament are the same. There's a guy from Brewery Church. I don't know if Jason, if you've met Josh yet. It's Becky's son. He's 22, and
yeah, we talked about
yeah. Last week he said something about this part of this show. He said he had heard that the eye for an eye law was given because the nations surrounding Israel and the culture of that day was like, you could, if somebody gouged your eye out, you could take their eye and maybe take their hand. Like you could take more than what they took from you. So he said that he had heard this law was given to limit the punishment, so it was at least equal. So it was supposed to make it more fair. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's really interesting because if that's true, if it's true, it was given to protect people.
I think with this, and when we talk about this topic, I think we flirt with this line of vengeance or revenge versus punishment. And so, I mean, if you commit a crime, you get punished. I mean, that's justice would be another word of saying that, justice. And I think in this series, Jesus is referring to that. Let the court of God deal with that versus revenge. I think there we look at the ancient Israelites. I mean, just face it. I mean, they did a lot of, bad stuff. I mean, when it comes to, I think they're trying to, build their kingdoms. I'm not sure that would be a big example. I mean, God told them to go in there and just destroy a whole city down to every living creature. I mean, I'm going to do that today and say, look what they did to us bad. So I think we got to look at this as when we think about these things is, are we seeking this, this, whatever it is that we're doing, are we seeking that because it's justice or is it because it's revenge? Those are two separate things.
This is the part where I struggle. So I'm obviously, as I've discussed, just starting out on kind of my spiritual religious journey here, right? And in my mind, the concept of justice is for God and Jesus. That means I have to fall back on, like, I trust the decisions they make, the decisions the actions they do. I trust that whatever. Again, I'm gonna go back to something extreme. They murder someone, a friend of mine. I trust that somehow, some way that was supposed to happen, or that person should be forgiven in whatever way. The trust and the faith that situation will be handled appropriately. That's a part I don't have yet, and that's why I can sit here and say I kind of understand the eye for an eye. Now, if someone steals from me, should I steal from them? No, but again, I'm aiming at the extreme version, which is, look at, and maybe I'm diving too socio-political here, but look at, our court system. If you commit murder, you have the opportunity. I don't mean that to sound good, but possibility, a better way to say it, of facing the death penalty, right? So in my mind, that's the eye for an eye. If you harm me, if you steal from me, you then face the consequences of our court system. So that's what I feel. That's how, and like Purdy says, hate can, linger and cause a bunch of bad things. And if you think from a mental or a psychological standpoint, what's the lesser of two evils? Forgive and let go of some long-term hate, or carry that around with you and potentially let that poison you, right? So if I think about it that way, again, with my baptized self currently, the forgiveness as the lesser evil, it makes sense. Maybe there is some method to the madness in the writings here, more than just trust that God will provide or uphold. I don't know.
I don't think it's natural to us, regardless. Like we're wired to want revenge. That's why we like watching Mel Gibson movies. But okay, so this is gonna be funny because John's gonna know who I'm talking about. But when I was much younger, I was dating a girl, and I got engaged to her, and then she decided she wanted to start dating somebody else, and then so she ended up marrying him, like at the place that we booked our wedding and reserved and everything. It was very difficult for me. Now I'm older, I look at it, I'm like, we were young. Really, it was probably the right decision for us to not continue because compatibility. But at the time, like, I was so like, I don't know, that was a dark phase. So I went through 2 or 3 years of an angry phase. I pretty much wasted that time because I couldn't connect with any other girls, or the anger did poison me. So and it's not like things are super easy when something like that happens to me now, but I can at least look at some periods of time I've been through and be like, okay, yeah, I've poisoned myself before. And
that's a good point.
I also think there's a difference though between forgiveness and forgetting. Forgiveness, you're letting go of that. You're giving, I don't want to call it blessing, but you're letting go of that wrong that has been committed against you. It doesn't mean that you forget. And I think in a lot of situations, you would almost be a fool to forget, because those are learning experiences, those are learning opportunities, things that lead up to those situations, and someone that wrongs you. There are takeaways to every hurt and every negative that we experience. So, but again, if getting back to Nick's comment in terms of murder, somebody murders a family member of mine, it's not my place to be able to go out and carry out an execution on whoever wronged me in that way or wronged the person I loved. We have courts, we have legal systems, and so did they. And I think that was kind of more of the push that was being presented in the episode, was that that there's man's law and there's God's law, but it's not yours to carry out at the end of the day.
What do you think? Just a question on that. They're down on the forgive part. You think that forgive part is? I look at this more for the individual that's been harmed than is the individual doing the harm, and that way it kind of leaves that hate, that anger, so you can kind of move on. I don't know if you agree with me on that or.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you that I think that's geared, and I think again, that's kind of the wisdom that comes with that philosophy, is that it's to prevent self-harm. It's to prevent lost time of consumption with a situation. And again, somebody steals your lawnmower, that's going to be a different scenario than, somebody taking your eye.
Challenge accepted.
Side note here, Nick has had several lawnmowers stolen from his residences in the past.
Me too.
So,
Or one.
But yeah, I think there's a difference in terms of severity, but if we're talking about the worst of the worst, if you really go into that dark place and think through it, it's not for the person that's wronged you. It's for yourself. It's for the people around you, that you continue life and can move on from those terrible events.
It reminds me of this, seen this video, and it was the young man murdered the woman's son. She shot him. It was, I don't know what it was, drug deal went bad or something. The woman was a real religious woman, and I found it to be kind of emotional when she testified, because the victims get to speak. She actually told the guy that murdered her son, she goes, "I don't forgive you for the crime you've done. I forgive you as an individual." And she goes, "And you're going to go to prison, and you're going to spend the rest of your life there." And she goes, "You're going to have a hard time." And she's like, "I'm going to pray for you every night that you don't have to struggle and that you have a hard time." I found that like really emotional. I was like, I have the strength to sit there and do that without, climbing over the podium or something. And so I was like, wow. And the guy who committed the crime, this is a big gangster guy. He broke down in tears. It was just emotional kind of moment there, and the whole court was kind of like, the judge that was even kind of wiping it a little bit. So it's just kind of I think it takes a lot of strength to do that with that woman.
Well, John and I know somebody similar. Well, we had a teammate cross country where her husband was murdered downtown by a 16-year-old, gang member. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know.
I read interviews. Yeah, it's probably kind of a tough subject, but he went jogging in a kind of a bad area of Indy, and he got shot. I remember reading interviews with her where she said, she asked people to pray for the guy who shot her husband. And I just didn't understand. I do understand, like, that's the goal. That's where we want to get, not be so angry, but to be like, okay, this is clearly a troubled guy, but how she could say that so quickly after it happened, I'm like, that she's a really strong individual. Like, it was hard for me to read that article.
I don't think I've got that emotional strength or emotional maturity. Man, if I knew who it was, you couldn't get me in the courtroom. There's not enough police officers to hold me back.
Hey, honesty is a sign of a strong individual too.
I'm sure.
I think it also goes to speak too in terms of, we all have emotional responses to things, and recognizing those and working towards them. Nobody's perfect. None of us here are, but working towards those and trying to address them. It's, in my opinion, a lot of this is you gotta put forth the effort, whether you fail or not. Like, it's the effort and the recognizing of it that means more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, I didn't catch this until this conversation, but the next thing Jesus is going to talk about is the expectation of the Messiah, because one of the kids is going to bring up Rabbi Josiah says that the Messiah is going to come overthrow the Romans. Well, aren't they thinking that way because they're caught up in that whole eye for an eye type of thinking? Because they're wanting somebody to come along and destroy the Romans, right? So I didn't realize, like, those two issues are very much connected. What do you think about that whole Jesus says smart men sometimes lack wisdom when talking about what this other rabbi is teaching? That's awesome to me, because I know some really smart people who either clearly misunderstand some things, and like I know I do too, but why is it that you can be really smart but be wrong about something? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it?
The whole book smart versus common sense versus street smarts concept, right?
I'm having some names come to mind from high school. I'm not going to say words.
You think maybe
It's,
Jesus was just being? I mean, he had him say that Shema prayer, and to me, I think he was. I mean, it starts off real well, but then when it gets towards the end, and it starts coming some of the stuff that the Pharisees kind of added to it, it's kind of emotional. I don't think he's happy with that. He has the kids doing all these little chores and stuff. Really ain't anything, but I think he's using that to kind of educate them. He's teaching them. He's re-educating them. I think sometimes when, even though the student does something bad, you still say good job, or I think he's doing it even with when he says like things like, just because you're smart doesn't mean you have wisdom. It's just a nice way of saying they're wrong. And so he spends that whole time of just change them so much so that the kids are talking about it amongst themselves. And so it's just kind of, I get the whole thing was just him re-educating the kids is what I get.
Yeah.
I do have a question. So he has them recite, I believe it's the Lord's Prayer, right? I think probably closer to the end.
It's like
What's
an
that?
early version
It was
of
the
it.
Shema, I think it was what they call it.
The Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be that. Like they said that, right? I didn't make that up.
That's the first part. But then when you get to the second part, where you look at the, I guess the Pharisees had added stuff to it. And so if you look at, when it gets to the second part, it actually goes down. You can't hardly hear what the kids are saying. You notice he kind of gets a little emotional on that part there.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that was my question. So that prayer already existed? These kids weren't like just reciting something and learning it for the first time.
I assumed they learned it at school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I was trying to pick that up because I was like, did he just make this up on the fly? Like, is this how they created the Lord's Prayer?
No, it was definitely something ingrained in them.
Okay.
I mean, I would equate it, like when we were in elementary school. Well, I don't, Nick, you're in Arkansas, I think, but the Pledge of Allegiance, things like that, where it was something that had been ingrained from a young age.
We still say the Pledge of Allegiance in Arkansas.
If you notice, they were saying it without even really thinking about it. I mean, they're just kind of, they're still doing stuff that's so ingrained in them. They're just kind of like, they're still walking around, concentrating on other stuff, but they're just still all kind of, I guess regurgitating it.
Mm-hmm. That can be a good or a bad thing, because if it becomes disconnected from its original meaning, it's obviously a bad thing. On the other hand, if you're able to retain what something is supposed to mean, it could be a good, functional foundation in your brain.
Absolutely. You don't want to just go through the motions or say the words and then everything's okay. There's meaning and intent behind it.
And if you notice later on in the series, or later on in the show, he actually he has them praying a different way.
Oh man, I didn't catch that.
What's the difference? Then you just a little bit farther up from that, he's, our Father out in heaven, and they kind of go on. And so in a way, he's kind of changing them from that Shema prayer to a different way of praying, which is how he's been praying the whole time that you see, from the beginning all the way to the end.
So
go ahead, Nathan. I was just going to say, not to get too far off subject, but one of the things, and this was actually kind of early on, but I think it transitioned through the entire episode, that I found a little bit interesting and curious everyone else's take on it. Did anybody else feel like Jesus at night, when he was alone, especially early in the episode, seemed almost in anguish?
Oh yeah, that's what I thought.
It was like begging God for guidance, like help me, speak through me. get me from point A to point B. And then as the episode progressed and, more and more children were involved and he was able to interact with them more, it seemed like some of that burden that he was carrying was eased. I don't know. That's kind of how I saw it, but
I kind of agree. I kind of saw that too, particularly at the beginning. I'm thinking he's really kind of stressed out. The way I looked at it is, he knows what's going to happen. He kind of makes a reference. Obviously, he meant gathered Mary Magdalene. He tells the kids, he goes, "I'm out in the daytime gathering these people. They're going to help me do something important." And so I took it that he already knows what's coming. He's already highly stressed out, almost tears, and he finding some kind of a peace, I guess, with the kids there. I think at least during the day.
I'm glad you guys brought that up because I was trying to figure out the connection between that opening scene and the rest of the episode because I couldn't quite figure it out, but that makes sense now. He looks like he's stressed out, like he's getting ready to I thought that was the scene where he's praying in the garden before the cross at first, like a flash forward, and then to find out like he's just going to talk with some kids. I was like, huh?
Doesn't he know the whole time? Like, isn't that the story? Is that Jesus knew the whole time that he was gonna have to die for those sins? So
yeah, he has to know. So this is a theological debate, which is interesting. I think based on what's written in Isaiah in the Old Testament, he knows he's going to die. He knows he's going to be crucified because there's references to being hung on a tree and stuff. So I think he knows generally what and how. Well, my question is, like, when he becomes, human, like, there's different debates on that, but like he asks God stuff that if he knew everything, he should know the answer to. So I think he has some knowledge, like some knowledge beyond what we have, but like there are certain things that for some reason like God doesn't totally reveal to him, I think. And so he may not necessarily know all the fine details, but he gets the gist. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So when I decided to start going down this journey to try and learn more about spirituality and religion, I did what every stereotypical person would do. I turned on and decided, let's watch Passion of the Christ. So started watching that, and it opens, and here's this dude. Because remember, this is my first real foyer into this deeply, if you will. There's this dude crying in a garden. What the hell? What's going on? And my wife, Liz, paused it. She's like, "That's Jesus." Oh, why is he crying? She's like, "Because he knows he's about to have to suffer, and he's not sure how's it going." I was like, "Well, if he knows he's got to suffer, why is he doing it? Just run away." And that snowballed downhill and went to a whole other discussion. But the point is, it was you mentioned that you thought this was like that scene where he was crying in the garden, and then you say that he may not necessarily know at this point in time. Well, I think that leads me to one of my questions. I don't know where this episode takes place in the timeline. Is this right after he's just helped Lilith, or what, Mary?
Yeah, there's a reference to it.
So he said, I helped some woman in a town.
Yeah.
Was that okay? So
it's that time frame.
So could he be stressed because he just helped her and he kind of took on her burden? And these kids kind of enlighten him, and he's like, "Hey, there's hope, and I'm teaching these kids, and they're learning, and just kind of the general goodness and hope that kids bring, supposedly."
Well, I also wondered if some of the stress was like these innocent kids are growing up in this corrupted human system, and they're all messing up religion, and look what they're about to indoctrinate them into. Because what if the Pharisees, who are super legalistic, turn some of these kids super legalistic, and they're really hard on people. I don't know if any of that is that's what I was wondering. Is that somehow connected to this episode? Because he knows what these kids are facing in life. I don't know.
I kind of took it a little. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I kind of took it. Maybe I'm not read into it. I think he knows what's going to happen at the end. I mean, obviously, look at the script. He knows he's going to get crucified. So I think he, at this point, the way I kind of looked at it is, he knows what the end result is, but he doesn't know exactly when the end result is going to be. And so if you look at what he's doing, he's gathering people now. He's finding the disciples. And so he knows that this is the start to the beginning. I'm getting these people. Who knows what's going to happen eventually? And so it's kind of like that because he knows it's like I said, the start of the end. And so he might not know exactly step by step what's going to happen, but he knows the end result.
Once you get on
I
the
read
show,
into
there's no getting off.
Yeah,
that's exactly where I was going to go with it too. And I guess just a tangent off of that, but does it matter? I mean, let's say that he does know everything playing out. Would that lessen the burden? Because again, at this point, he's on Earth as a man. I don't see that lessening any of that stress that I would feel. You know, if I knew, hey, I'm going to be executed in 3 years. You know, that would
executed's the what's the term, that considerate term that would have been used.
Yeah, obviously, and
in the
there's
most brutal way.
But again, that's not going to ease my mind knowing, oh, okay, I still have time before this happens. I'm going to be in turmoil over that. I don't know. I just don't know if it really matters if he has full knowledge of that path forward. I do think he does, but I just don't know if it really matters.
Mm-hmm.
He knows enough to know that it's bad. He's personally going to suffer to make this happen.
Actually, he makes a reference in there too. When the little girl asks, "Are you dangerous?" and he says, "To some I am."
Yeah.
And so who these some? He already knows what's going to happen. So
did Jesus know he was going to rise again, be resurrected?
I think so, but it's probably.
Is this one of those theological debate things?
I mean, I think that he probably had knowledge of that, but it is in those prophecies too. Like, well, a lot of religious leaders in that day expected that there would be a Messiah that dies and that returns. So, like, some were expecting a resurrection. There's a group called the Sadducees. They didn't believe that was going to happen, so they didn't believe in a resurrection. So I think there was enough knowledge in that day that I think he knew anyways, but in addition, culturally, that was a view that was circulating.
Just thinking, like, if I'm getting tortured, but I know that I'm going to come back from the dead, how hard am I really about to hang on? Right? Because if you don't know that you're going to come back, you're going to cling to hope that maybe the torture will end. So you're going to try and hang on and push through. I would. Of course, I also question the afterlife, so it's whole back to my spiritual journey thing. So, I mean, if he didn't know, I draw the line to cat of nine tails. That's it. That's all you get. After that, I'm done. I'm just gonna drop dead. That's it.
I guess
go ahead. I think even if he knew he was going to get resurrected, he knew he was going to get crucified. That's the pain and stuff that's coming. That's going to be stressful. I'm going to be resurrected, but all this I have to go through before that. And it's like John said, the guy's still human. There's a lot of stress there, especially when you know what's coming. It's going to be a brutal event that's going to happen to you.
You got to go find the hard drugs.
He was so stressed out in some of the Gospels. It says he was sweating blood before he even went to the garden. So that
Wow.
I guess that's a real medical, like it's very rare, but it is like a real medical thing or whatever you want to call it.
But even again, let's play that out in terms of someone currently, that's has faith, that believes in heaven and hell, and thinks, hey, when I die, I'm going to heaven. There's still, death is a scary thing. It's very final, and it's the only point of reference that we have is living. In terms of what we've actually experienced and seen and gone through. So that's still a terrifying thing.
If you believe there's an afterlife, what are you afraid of?
The actual the death part itself. I mean, if you're laying there in pain, I mean,
well, okay, sure. The physical suffering and the pain, that right. Piece, I got there, but the finale, I can't think of the right term, the final, the decisive aspect of death. If you truly believe and you truly feel like when it's all said and done, you're going to go to heaven, and heaven is described as paradise, and depending on your religion, there might be 45 virgins waiting on you, right? But yeah, but if you truly, not close enough. But if you, then what's, I mean,
it still doesn't cancel out the fact that I'm leaving behind the people I love, even if it's for a finite time. I have to say goodbye to you for a moment, in hopes and expectations that you're going to see me on the other side too, that you're going to get to the other side as well. I've got to say goodbye to you. I've got to say goodbye to my family, to my friends. There's a level of uncertainty there still, at least in my opinion, that it's still a scary thing, faith or no faith. It's a finite stop in a lot of ways. I don't know.
I agree. It's that physical and emotional anguish both together. It's the hurdle.
Well, I guess you could say, like, the human brain can only handle so much uncertainty, or it just gets overwhelmed and it shuts down. I guess the other part that could be really stressful about it is, like, not everybody, like, in most religions and the idea of heaven, not everybody goes there. And so,
right.
Like, there's a lot of people I know, that I might not see there, and that's a really painful thought in itself. So I don't know. There's a lot of dimensions to why death could be really overwhelming, even if you know what's coming after.
And if you question yourself, if if you're righteous enough, if you're worthy enough to go to heaven.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like tributaries coming off this topic. We could deep dark wells we can dive into of discussion. But what's I will say though, so like you said, you question yourself. Well, I mean, I don't remember what the exact definition is, but there's people on death row or life in prison who are born again or religious, or they've been saved, or whatever the term is. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to heaven. I'm good. I got dunked in the water. I'm golden now. Or I got the water poured on my head. Like, I'm golden now. Sorry, not to downplay it, but there's, okay, you're in jail, you're in prison, you've done questionable things, and now you're suddenly good because you said it and someone dunked you underwater.
But
are you sure you believe?
Finding peace isn't necessarily the same thing as taking comfort. And again, I don't think it's that crazy to say that there's still fear there, even if you have peace. And I also think that for an episode dealing with children, this thing's gotten pretty dark. So
yeah, they're talking about some dark stuff, though. Well, how about let's see. Well, you guys have anything else to say on that?
Not that's appropriate.
Well, there's one more theme I really wanted to get into, and I've always wondered about what this means in Scripture, but Jesus says something about like needing the faith of children. That is always a perplexing thing to me. There's a verse. I don't know if Jesus quoted this. I think it was in the episode. It's Matthew 11:25. It says, God has hidden things from the wise and revealed them to children. I don't quite understand what all goes into that, so I thought that would be something to talk about. Like, what do you think he means by you need the faith of children? Because some people will say that means you need to not ask questions, or that means you need to have blind faith. I don't really think that's what he means, especially because, like Jason, you said these kids are really good at asking questions. So
I think when you look at, we see this debate today with school prayer. Children are essential to the livelihood of religion. I'm taking totally out academic answer. I mean, if you look at Muhammad, Islam, he targeted the women and the children. These kids are going to be mothers and fathers at one time. They're going to teach their kids what they know. And so if you want to actually sustain this religion, you have to, or in Jesus' way, the correct way, you have to make sure these kids understand the teaching and they're going the way that you want them to go so they can spread it on. Also, I think kids they're so innocent. They're not corrupted yet. I mean, they're just full of ideas and they're asking questions and there's not a lot of, as their minds could be molded. So it's, when you look at that there, I think is where it's kind of going that way.
I saw some of that too, because I was kind of thinking about how the older we get, I think we almost rack up human biases, like we all do, because it's harder for us to understand things we're not familiar with. And if somebody presents a new idea, like I grew up in a mostly fairly conservative circle, so like the question is like, well, if the Democrats come up with a really good policy that we need, am I going to be able to evaluate it fairly? Or it's hard if a different political party puts a policy out there, like you almost want to reject it right away. So a small percentage of people are actually going to take a minute to think about it, and then an even smaller percentage could see it if it is the right idea for something we need to do. You know what I mean? Like
that's called political socialization. You mean academic words?
You learn these, like hurdles.
You learn these things at a young age, and as you get older, it solidifies. And it's almost impossible to change your view once you're older. Politics works that way. Religion also works that way. For the most part, there is some exceptions, but once you've got those views, it's hard to get rid of them. I mean, when you get past that 50-year threshold, you're not going to change their mind. It's like,
yeah, you're telling me there's still time.
Well, it's not
for
impossible.
You.
I mean, like I've been working pretty hard at trying to reduce bias when I make decisions or when I think about things, politically, with religion. Like I work to reduce bias so that I can see things accurately. But even in doing that, okay, I think if you're just trying to do that, it will take you a long way. But it is impossible to remove all bias because some of it is invisible to us. So even as hard as I'm working at it, I know I'm not getting rid of all of it, because we've got this.
You could just acknowledge. You could just by acknowledging your biases, and that from the get-go, that's actually a benefit. And if you look at some of the political scientists, I mean, you write articles, they know what their biases are, and they tell you right from the get-go, I have a bias. So they acknowledge it. So sometimes that's half the battle right there.
Yeah. So that's 50% of it. Well, what do you guys think about that whole thing? Because honestly, I think with where society's at right now, our biases are getting even more extreme. Like you see the two political parties can't hardly talk to each other right now. So it's kind of concerning. But what do you guys think?
Well, if go ahead, Nick.
You lead.
You
Thanks.
step into the
firing squad here. Well, if we're talking current day situations in politics, I mean, I don't necessarily believe that, and maybe that's a bias that I have, that I think most people are good, that there's evil in the world, but there's a lot of good in the world. And, you know, Nick, for example, him and I will have some pretty intense political conversations sometimes, but we talk about it. We can still have a conversation. We respect each other's viewpoints, to where I don't necessarily know if what's being publicized is supporting that narrative. But I know firsthand experience that I have friends that are totally different than me and think totally different than me, and we're still friends. Like, end of the day, like, we just have different views on things. Same time, I also think there's some moral stakes that are pretty firm for most people. Things like murder is bad. You shouldn't try to hurt other people.
It's totally good.
But, you know, in terms of the children aspect of it, and this episode in particular, you know, it's, I do agree with Jason in a lot of what he said. It, you know, going down that path, I just kind of like, yeah, I'm on board. So
I think you just gotta know that, you know, as we get older, we're the sum of our experiences, right? And kind of how Jason pointed out, if you're raised a certain way, your experiences are biased towards whatever that way you're being raised is, right? So I look at religion the same way I've recently, started looking at politics, in that you need to make sure, or how do I say this correctly? It is in your best interest to be open and listen. And as a kid, you are very, I would think, whether we believe it or not, I think you're going to be more likely to listen as a younger kid, or absorb is a better way to say it. So you're more, what's the term? Moldable. I can't think of the right term. Anyway, regardless. So
receptive.
Thank you. Jesus. Great. Said the Lord's name in vain. Well, guys, I see you straight in hell. Anyway, the point is, these kids are more receptive. So, you know, they are the future because they have the opportunity to be molded. They don't have the biases they grew up with already ingrained in them. So, you know, like I was pointing back to the politics and religion for me at my current age, I do have the biases, but I'm stepping back to say, okay, you know what? Let's say politics in particular. At the end of the day, we all just want to be happy and live great lives. So let's explore other people's viewpoints, you know, whether you're left, right, up, down, whatever. Like, let's all listen to different ideas and try and come up with the smartest, best way forward. And you roll that into religion. You know, I'm walking the spiritual journey, and some of the older, more scholarly people I've talked to, I asked them questions about, you know, the Quran versus the Torah versus the Bible, and they're like, those are good questions. I don't know. You know, and it starts to become a lot of, I'm trying to compare the three, but the point is, I'm trying to be receptive, just like these kids are more able to be receptive. So the point is, these receptive kids are the future. If these kids get tainted or, you know, molded, brainwashed the wrong way, you're just going to have rinse and repeat. You'll have more of the Romans dominating the world.
I think we also can't underestimate the theme here that kids ain't as dumb as we think they are. I mean, they're quite knowledgeable. They're aware of current events, or aware of the situations that's kind of happening. I mean, you look at the scene where Abigail, her mom and dad are sitting there. She's there involved. She hears the conversations. I mean, she knows what's going to happen. So the kids know they're not just naive and don't understand. I mean, they're aware. So I can't overlook that.
Right.
What if we're dumber than them because of our bias and we just don't know it?
Do you remember those posters? I remember seeing them in like kindergarten, first grade, that it was like everything I ever needed to learn in life, I learned in kindergarten. And it was a list of like, be kind to others, you know, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of truth to that, just in terms of that innocence that's there. as a child, the inquisitive nature of children, and yeah,
That's good stuff, man.
That innocence gets killed later on if you're not careful. So yeah,
someone's not jaded.
A couple of years ago, I had the realization that oftentimes experience is a small sample size. Like when it comes to certain decisions, maybe I'm letting one or two experiences, color my decision, but really that's not a mathematical way, to make a decision. Like maybe my experience was like the outlier. And so we have to be pretty careful about making decisions based on experience, because it may or may not be a good way to go depending on the context. But
I think that says a lot about you, the fact that you can understand that that's a possibility, right?
Know your limits, Master Wayne. Dark Knight.
Yeah, exactly. Your way may not always be the right way.
Yeah. Well, this was good, man. I've really enjoyed discussing these episodes with you guys. I think you guys all have really good thoughts. This has been really enjoyable. So I'm looking forward to episode 4, especially since you said that's one of the director's favorites.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys noticed before we leave, but the toy that he just gave Abigail, do you guys notice that was a nativity scene?
Oh no, I thought it was just like a barn or something.
There was a little manger inside there. You guys didn't see that?
No. That's
wow,
awesome.
I missed that.
Man, you got a lot of good details this time.
Gold star for Jason.
If we wind it back, I was like, let's see what I thought I saw.
I watched it 3 times and I missed that.
I'm trying to keep up with you, Nick. I mean, you keep up with all these things. I'm like, come on, what the heck? I didn't see that.
I love it. You guys are bringing some really quality stuff to the discussion, so that's really cool.
It doesn't mean I'm right.
Hey, that's okay. No, that's
just most
really
of the time.
I still appreciate you, buddy.
I appreciate your appreciation.
Yeah, so final thoughts. Where do you rank this episode in the 3?
With regards to message, probably 1. With regards to if we're just talking about the show as a whole, 3. Like, if we're talking about a TV show, this one was pretty boring.
Kids are tormenting you at home, and you're like, "No more kids."
I actually like this one the best of all of them so far. I don't know why. I just like the whole idea that kids were there. It was just so innocent, so pure. I think the Jesus character, I mean, he had a lot of stuff going on. We talked about. I mean, the message is coming out. I mean, I like the idea how they use the kids to pull information out of Jesus for us to hear. I just kind of really like that. So yeah. It wasn't overcomplicated, I guess. I kind of liked it.
I guess I would rate it as probably my favorite so far. Definitely the easiest to watch in some ways. And I also think they did a pretty good job of depicting Jesus as a person in a lot of ways. Little nuances like him bandaging his wound, showing that, hey, he can get hurt too. And brushing his teeth. I mean, that whole little
that's good,
segment, like, those little nuances that were throughout the episode, I really thought helped bring in that human element to his character. And the messaging throughout the entire episode was awesome. So, I would say this is probably my favorite along those terms.
He doesn't ever say that he's the Messiah or Jesus, even when the boy asks. He never tells them. So I like that relationship there. They just think he's a regular dude.
This episode definitely made him the most human. Because if you look at, I want to say it was in episode 1 where Mary's in the bar or something and she went to drink again and she grabs his arm. It's like, that's not for you. It's like, okay, all right. That's a little on the nose, right? And then I think the second episode where he sees her and he like helps her, heals her, whatever. It's like, okay, cool, you're the Messiah. But this episode, it's like you said, he's just a regular, normal dude. Just a guy in a field that whittles and hangs out with kids. Like, just a normal dude.
Yeah, I thought that by the end, I thought that the kids knew he was the Messiah. I mean, I don't know for sure, but because he says, like, he makes a reference to the disciples, like, my next students are not going to be, and not going to come to this conclusion as early as you are, or something along those lines. I thought that they knew he was the Messiah, but I thought that he let them come to that conclusion. But it is kind of vague, so they don't definitively say, like, yes, they understand this, or no, they don't. But yeah, I like the way he approached them, because, like, he didn't tell them what to think, he didn't tell them what to do. He sat there, had these discussions, and just kind of let them be them. And I thought that was really cool. For me, I thought this episode, I don't think I'd rank it my favorite, but I'd rank that scene, that 5-minute scene where they're talking about justice and whether or not the Messiah is going to be a military leader. I thought that was genius. I watched it like 5 or 6 times. Especially in that one scene, there's all these different issues that people, like religious people, wrestle with now. We wrestle with some of them, but there's stuff like who is Jesus? What do we expect him to do? Like, that's tied to that whole Messiah is going to be a military leader. I mean, and then he says, where in Scripture does it say that? Like, I've starting to find different ideas floating around in different traditions, and most of them are on unimportant stuff, but there are critical things like, would Jesus do this or that, or how would Jesus treat people today? Like, would he really be out there protesting in front of Target or whatever? Like, there's application here that, like, we as older adults, like, struggle to comprehend, and those themes are being addressed here. So I'm still very impressed with the show, the way that they bring up these issues, and they don't shy away from some of those controversial issues. So I'm really enjoying that. So I am really looking forward to the next episode. Any last words?
And
I would think, what were the more conservative crowd think of this series, and just kind of what their input is on
that's exactly where I was going.
That.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
I think to kind of get back to Nick's point there, I think we can talk about religion and politics, because that's what I teach politics. You have to be careful, which I think case now, where politics is actually influencing religion and not religion. It's not the other way around.
I agree. So what he's doing with those kids, sort of like reteaching them, reprogramming them, almost, or he's undoing some of the damage that maybe religious leaders have taught these kids. I think this show is attempting to do that with religious people who may have some misconceptions about what Jesus is like. That's why I love it. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, there's something to be said about what you just said there, Jason. Whether religion influenced politics or politics influenced religion. I think if you take religion and the morals and the values that we're supposed to take away from religion and let that influence your politics, and then in my mind let your politics of we all just want to have a good, happy, healthy life, and mix that in with your morals and values, I think if you uphold, keep that balance, I think it'd be great. But like you said, we're in a world where one's really kind of pushing back on the other, and we see it so often. You mentioned Nathan, but would Jesus be out in the parking lot, protesting in front of the Target or whatever? I was wondering, like, where's my WWJD bracelet, right?
Yeah.
But that's such an interesting thing that I haven't even thought about. We look at all of these things that are going on in present day events, and it's like, well, okay, what would Jesus want? What would the Bible tell us to do? But to be fair, if you say that out loud, or you say that in a public setting or the wrong setting, you're now that person. right? You're going to be labeled as, or you're going to be called biased as, you're the overly conservative, da da da. Well, spoiler alert, I'm probably the most liberal one here, but I'm still curious what the hell Jesus would do in that situation. I'm just one.
If you look at this, if you look at what's going to happen here, which is kind of a political message, is Jesus actually disrupts the status quo. And I mean, well, I say quo. And so, I mean, with the whole Pharisees, enough so we're actually causing him to get crucified. I mean, he has issues with that right there. I think it's right. I mean, there's a clear message right there, which if you kind of look at it, we kind of see the same thing today. I mean, kind of when it comes to that role of religion, society, religion when it comes to politics or government. Kind of seeing that same, message kind of coming around.
So we need to go look for that 32-year-old who's a year away from going on the cross again. Sorry, wrong religion. My bad.
Well, I think our meeting, I don't know if it's gonna expire or not, or if it'll keep going because the cutoff.
We're gonna find out.
But yeah, so I'll wrap it up just in case, and then we can keep visiting. So, hey, thank you guys so much for listening. And in 2 weeks from the release of this episode, we'll release our podcast on episode 4. If you got any questions for us, contact us on social media, Instagram under Church in a Brewery. And we would love to hear from you because we'd love to discuss your questions on this podcast. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you again soon.